I've been debating on sharing this for a few weeks now, and I figured, why not, right? I mean, spooky season is practically here already. So, this happened back in October of 2013 during my senior year of high school. My sister, who could really be called a medium, and I had been browsing the web for urban legends when we stumbled upon an article about a game known as the Game of 100 Candles. In short, this game was a sort of ritual very similar to the way Bloody Mary is supposed to work. To put a long story short, the people playing this game had to light 100 candles and tell a ghost story, then blow out one of the candles. At the end of the game, you should have conjured 100 separate spirits, and like every ritual game, it warned you to play at your own risk. But no big deal, right? None of these things are real. We found a night where our mom wouldn't be home until after 2 a.m. and planned for our game. My sister, her best friend T, another friend N, and I prepared for our night. We waited until our mum left and for the sun to begin to set. Then we proceeded to set up our kitchen. We placed 100 tea candles on the counter, found a box of matches, and as the sun sank lower, we shut off the lights in our house, opened up our glass door so the smoke from the candles wasn't too bad, and turned off our cell phones. Around 7:30, once it was perfectly dark, we started the game by lighting the candles. At first, we just told light-hearted stories, like my eyes are a ghost and it went boo kind of thing. As we finished the first 10 candles, there was a palpable change in the atmosphere around us. The air had a static feel to it, and the hair on my neck and arms began to stand on end. As mentioned, my sister qualifies as a medium who can see and feel things that are not apparent to the naked eye, and even she began to squirm in her chair. As we started the next set of candles, 11 to 20 this time, the house became painfully quiet, and the stories also began to grow darker. The stories we told went from silly folklore to real-time accounts of strange things we had seen. As the candles were blown out, we began hearing creaking and cracking around us. Now, we did live in an older house, but the house never groaned, or cracked, at least not this loudly before. We finished the next set of 10, and everyone playing was visibly beginning to feel uncomfortable. I mean, the laughter had stopped, and a more somber tone had taken over. Again, we ignored the strange sounds and just continued to play. As the time passed and it grew closer to 8:45, the game took a sour turn though. The cracks and creaks became louder and more frequent, and as the 25th candle was blown out, we heard the distinct sound of someone pulling into the driveway, shutting a car door, and walking up the deck to enter through the glass doors. We waited, but the motion lights on our driveway just never lit up, and nobody ever came to the door. Then we heard footsteps leading back across the deck and out of earshot. One of our friends suggested that we pause to look outside and make sure our mum had not returned home early or something, and she hadn't. At this point, my sister suggested using a dowsing pendulum. Our friends agreed, and we laid out the rules, clockwise for yes, counterclockwise for no, and saying goodbye and whatnot. My sister then asked the room, "Is someone here with us?" And the pendulum began to rapidly swing in a clockwise direction. Our friend N asked, "Is there more than one of you here?" And the pendulum began to swing clockwise again. N said this was some sort of trick and took the pendulum himself. I asked, "Did you come because we played the game?" Again, the pendulum swung clockwise. Finally, T provoked it by saying, "If you really are there, why don't you prove it?" And promptly, we heard a loud thud against the wall behind us. We decided that we were just freaking ourselves out, though, and someone must have been with us and had obviously managed to throw something in the dark to make the noise. But curiosity got the better of us, and we suggested that we just keep playing. So we did. T told a story about seeing a spectre in his dreams once, then seeing it in real life. He put out the 26th candle, and 2 others blew out. At this time, my sister became visibly frightened. The reason was unknown to us until later, but she claims that at this time she saw a solid black mass moving down the hallway towards us. It felt like the house had become 10 degrees cooler after this candle was blown out, too. And we all felt that. We sat in silence for a moment before N says, "If you're really here, I need a sign." And this is when things really hit the fan. We heard heavy, loud footsteps coming down the hallway and doors creaking open. The flames of the candles started to waver with no wind, and N grabbed my hand and whispered that something was breathing behind him. Even though I'm seated to his right, and my sister and her friend are directly across from us, we couldn't see anything. N freezes up though, and then turns around suddenly with nothing behind him. Then, with nothing near it, the door that we had left open slowly creaked shut with no wind present. T says that someone is touching his arm, then his neck, and then his face. At this time, we just decided to stop playing. I believe the exact phrase was, "Fuck this, I'm done, say goodbye." So we did. We extinguished the rest of the candles and began turning on the lights, moving as a group. Although the candles were out and the game was over, there was still this really heavy feeling all around. We moved to our dining room, where we had heard the thud earlier, to turn the rest of the lights on. But as we entered the room as a group and turned on the lights, Halloween decorations littered the ground like they had been thrown from their original places. On top of our server was my mum's old battery-powered witch. Her motor had burned out years ago, and we never put batteries in anymore. She was just simply sitting there. But we started hearing a cracking noise from the corner of the room. We slowly turned around to see that the witch was rocking and bringing her wrinkled hands together, slowly getting faster and faster until the witch just fell over as her body hit the ground. We heard the loud bang of a door or cabinet slamming shut somewhere else in the house, too. Suddenly, our friend T screamed that his face was burning. We turned around, and he had a small scratch on his face with a trickle of blood running down his cheek. And that was it. We grabbed phones and keys and just ran out of the house, dropped our friends off, and didn't return home until much, much later. When we did eventually return home though, another friend came over to stay up with us until our mum got home. We turned on cartoons, cranked the volume, and just tried to ignore the banging and the footsteps and the heavy breathing that wandered through our house for the rest of the night. In the years following our night of playing 100 candles, we've seen quite a bit of activity in our home. I've shared this in other places, but I sincerely believe that this was a catalyst for the activity in our home. I have since moved, but my sister remains in our home and still frequently experiences phenomena, including seeing the shadowy figure occasionally. Hindsight is 20/20, and we really should have listened to the warnings, I know, but we were young and curious. Many years ago, I worked on an ambulance, first responding to 911 calls and all that. One day, we were dispatched to a person not acting right type of call. When my partner and I arrived at the apartment complex, the first thing we noted was that all the people, except for the patient, who were living in the same unit, were standing outside with terrified looks on their faces, shaking violently. It was raining, and it was nighttime outside. but I quickly approached them and asked what was going on. The 25-year-old male looked at me and said, "Yeah, so we were just playing a game when suddenly my girlfriend started shrieking and screaming. All the lights went out, including the candles, and then we saw her lay on her stomach on top of the board game. My girlfriend's head, hands, and legs all went into the air, and suddenly she just fell to the floor, stood up, and ran into the back of the apartment. My partner and I then cautiously walked up the steps to the apartment door with our mag lights. The door was already cracked open, so I politely knocked and introduced myself as a 911 ambulance paramedic before walking inside the apartment unit. The light switch didn't work, but I could hear a creaking wooden noise in the background, just squeaking back and forth. All the walls were painted dark colors like black and maroon, and it was obvious that these people liked heavy metal, skulls, and dark paintings because they were represented all over the walls. I started walking through the apartment, calling out for the patient, looking for any sign of her. As I walked deeper and deeper into the unit, it just started getting colder and colder. Finally, I saw her in a rocking chair. She was slowly rocking back and forth and just looking straight forward. I introduced myself to her and asked her what's going on. There was no answer from her, and she just kept rocking back and forth. I got up close to her, looking for any medical abnormalities, and her eyes were so dark. Either her pupils were that big, or her eye color was just that dark. But all of her other vital signs were pretty normal. Her blood sugar was normal. She didn't appear to be having any seizure activity or anything. I tried to get a painful stimulus out of her by squeezing her shoulder or doing a sternal rub, but she wouldn't even flinch. I couldn't find any track marks on her for drug use or anything. And throughout all of this, she just kept rocking back and forth, just looking straight forward. The rule of thumb for paramedics in this situation, not being alert to person, place, time, or event is that she needs to go to the hospital. I tell her that since she's not talking with me, I'll be moving her to a stretcher, and suddenly the rocking just stops. I mean, all sound everywhere just stops. I can only hear breathing, noises now, while I lift under her armpits and my partner lifts under her legs. As we lift, we notice something really strange. The patient stays in a seated form, like completely rigid. We lay her on the stretcher and wheel her to the inside of the ambulance. As we load her into the back, cracking noises like a breaking tree branch fill the air. I look over at her and notice now that she's looking right at me with a huge, scary, crazed smile on her face. And no matter where I moved, her head and eyes just tracked me with that same unwavering smile, too. My partner looks over at me sympathetically, knowing that I'll have to be in the back with her. I playfully say, "Good, now maybe you'll talk." To me, we begin riding to the hospital, and the heat was on full blast in the back of the ambulance. But no matter how hard we pumped it, it just wouldn't heat up. She was still smiling that big toothy smile and staring at me, too, not answering any of my questions. I looked down to grab my pen that fell on the floor, and then looked back up. Out of nowhere, the high-pitched screams and shrieks filled the air as she started lunging at me and grabbing at me. She clashed her teeth and bit at me in my direction, trying all she could to break loose. Luckily, the stretcher seatbelts were secured to her, making me just out of reach. The huge, crazed smile broke into a frightening look of terror and then anger. My back was against the wall of the box. Luckily, we were already at the hospital unintentionally. A Catholic one, mind you. As the ambulance drove in, the patient stopped all she was doing. She calmly looked straight back forward and just went mute again. We brought her into the ER and talked with the doctor about what had happened, who, needless to say, was pretty astonished by the story. So, a bit of backstory first. I've been best friends with this girl since high school, I think, for probably close to 15 years now. In fact, I used to practically spend more time at her house than my own. Her parents are great people, and they treated me like another daughter because my parents are pretty awful themselves. However, my best friend started dating a guy about a year and a half ago. Since they got serious, we haven't hung out much at all. She has since bought a house and moved in with him, too, and I spend a lot more time at their house now. But it's been nearly 2 years since I've spent any time in her parents' home, aside from going over there for the holidays and whatnot. At some point, though, within the past year or so, her mum got really into estate sales. She would go and buy antiques and then either fill her house up with them or try to resell them on eBay. I don't know if this is related to the experiences that I've been having, but I find it hard to believe that these strange occurrences have nothing to do with all the objects belonging to dead people that they now have in their house. Anyway, my best friend's parents contacted me about pet seating for them while they went on vacation for a week. I was glad to do it because I owe them a lot, and honestly, I love their 3 dogs. I've known them since they were puppies. They had the 3 dogs shut in the tiled kitchen or dining sunroom area using a baby gate. That way, if there were any accidents, it was easy to clean since there was no carpet. Plus, the oldest dog, a bulldog, overheats easily, so he likes to be sprawled out on the tiles. The bowls of dog food and water were left out for them, and I was supposed to head over there 2 or 3 times a day to just spend maybe an hour there. No big deal. So, the first day I showed up to let the dogs outside, I did all my other duties. The gate between the kitchen and the rest of the house had been knocked down, though it was honestly not really something that I thought twice about. The dogs probably knocked it over themselves, being rowdy or something. But 2 of the dogs were still in the kitchen, though the gate had fallen in a way that prevented them from easily getting out. The bulldog was missing, though, which was a little weird because he couldn't easily get over the gate either. But I figured he probably kicked it over behind him and wandered off to nap somewhere or something. Because of his age, he is definitely the least likely to make a mess or cause trouble, so I wasn't too worried. But I realized that that meant I had to check the rest of the house for any accidents just to be safe. First, I got the other 2 outside. I was going to list the things I had to do: feed the fish, refill the food and water bowls, etc. When I got this kind of weird feeling. The bulldog is mostly blind, but he normally would have come wiggling to greet me, and all the noise I'd been making with the food would definitely have brought him over. So I started calling the dog and looking for him. I immediately heard him barking, but I couldn't find him anywhere. I looked at all of his favorite spots, but there was nothing. At this point, I was in full panic mode, mostly because I could hear the dog but just couldn't see him. So I felt like I was losing my mind or something. Finally, out of desperation, I started throwing open doors upstairs, and I found him scared out of his wits, shut in the guest bedroom. This made me feel really uneasy. My best friend's parents had been renovating the upstairs of their house, so the carpets were torn up and all the furniture was moved into storage. But they had shut all the doors before leaving to keep the cats out of them because all of the tools and stuff laying around could have hurt them so. How the hell did one of the dogs get one of the doors open and then manage to get shut inside? 2. I mean, the gate coming down I'd been totally willing to write off as accidental. But finding the dog shut inside a bedroom that I knew had been closed off just made me feel really scared. I called my friend and told her what had happened, mostly to keep myself occupied while I was still at the house. She told me that her parents had actually bought a really nice dog gate before they left, but had forgotten to unpack it, and that I could open it and set it up if I thought that would help Dot. So, I found the giant box by the front door, emptied it, and got to work. It took the better part of an hour to set up, but it was this really good quality pressure-locked gate. It was made of metal, came up to chest height, probably around 4 feet tall. I'd sand takes 2 hands to open. Let me tell you, there was just no way that a dog could knock this down accidentally. Like I said, 2 hands are required to open it, 2. There are like 2 parts to the locking mechanism. You have to sort of hold this button down with one hand in order to slide the lock off with the other hand, content with a job well done. I left that night and went home to my own dogs. The next morning, I came back to find no issues, the gate had worked. But when I headed there after work that night, my heart dropped to my stomach. Somehow the gate had been opened. Not knocked down as if the dogs had done it, but opened, and the rest of the gate was still in place between the door frame. I refused to believe that the dogs had somehow opened it. Again, the bulldog was missing, too. And again, I found him shut in the same room upstairs. Day 3, I go back, expecting more of the same stuff, and I'm practically prepared for it this time. But it just gets so much worse. The kitchen, dining room, sunroom, and living room are all arranged in a sort of circle. From the living room, you head into the kitchen. From the kitchen, you move into the dining room or the sunroom. And then from there, you can head through a door into the living room. However, the door between the living room and the sunroom is always locked, but actually locked. And to keep anyone from getting any funny ideas, they actually have a chair directly in front of the door, blocking it from opening. But the reason they do this is because the way the door swings open, if someone were to open it, the door would hit their expensive sound equipment for their TV. This door is not used regularly and has not been used since I met her. In fact, they had recently put a treadmill in the sunroom that totally blocks the door from being used. What I'm trying to say is, that's how infrequently this door is used. Anyway, I walk into the house that night and was greeted by the dogs. Okay, I guess the gate is opened again, awesome. Except this time, the gate was opened, and so was the door to the living room. The armchair that blocks the door had been pushed out of the way, too, and the door itself was unlocked. The keys left in the lock usually, and the door was just flung wide open. Now, while I do believe in the paranormal, I am naturally a pretty massive skeptic. I really don't believe any of the stories that I read online or any of the things that I see on TV, but at this point, I am terrified of my friend's parents' house. I know it hasn't been anything really bad, but I just don't want to be alone when that weird stuff is going on. Even if the door was somehow just accidentally unlocked and lightly. Mind you, but since I didn't personally check, who knows? I can't think of a rational explanation for how that chair moved, and I also don't have an explanation for the dog being shut in the one room. Especially the second time it happened, when I know that I personally double-checked the door and made sure it was firmly shut. I love and respect the family a lot, but I don't know how to tell them that I can't pet sit for them anymore. I just don't want to be in that house alone anymore. Anyway, I finished the pet sitting many days ago, and I went back a handful of times with either my sister or my best friend, never alone, mind you. And the times I went to check on the dogs with someone else, there was nothing weird. But I'm currently in talks with them about setting up a camera. So, I'll keep you updated if there's anything further. This happened a few years ago when I was around 20 or so. I'd say I was hanging out with my buddy Matt in my apartment located in the downtown area of a medium-sized Midwestern city. We were drinking whiskey, watching comedies, playing tunes, etc. He mentions that he has a close friend, Emily, who used to live in my apartment building with her mother, and she now apparently lives across the street from me. And he thought it would be a really good idea if we met because apparently we're very similar, and I was single and ready to mingle at that point in my life, so why not? He rings her cell and tells her to come by my place. She arrived at my apartment, and I instantly became fond of her. She was hilarious, very pretty, and a musician just like me. She was around 30, so about 10 years older than me. My friend Matt was 35. I've always had friends that are much older for some reason. We played songs together and laughed hysterically for hours. Matt decided to go home, leaving us two alone, and we chilled for a while longer, ended up making out. And I got all of her contact info before she told me she was going home and that we should meet up soon. Over the next few weeks, we developed a strong relationship and we hung out almost daily. I would throw some pajamas on and just walk across the street, and we'd get wasted and watch movies together. Quite honestly, it was just really awesome. After arriving home from my 10-day trip to New York City, things got really weird though. The day that I returned, she asked if she could come over. So, I unpacked all my stuff and then told her to stop by. She rings the buzzer, takes the elevator 7 floors up to my apartment, and lets herself in. I was talking non-stop about all of the awesome things I did and the people I met in New York City. And I could just immediately tell that she didn't want to hear any of it. She would change the subject every time I brought it up. And eventually she just said, "Can you stop talking about New York? I really don't give a fuck." I was surprised to hear her speak like this. The Emily that I'd been getting to know was not like that. She was caring and passionate and just an amazing person, or so I thought. Fast forward to a few nights later, and I'd just gotten home from working a 12-hour shift. I collapsed in bed, ready to pass out for the night. It's about 9 p.m. and I get a text from Emily that says, "Hey, what's up?" I don't feel much like replying at that moment because honestly, I'm just too exhausted. And our last hangout was just too weird for me to comprehend. So, I'm still trying to decide how to deal with that. I plug my phone into charge, turn off the lights, and fall asleep pretty effortlessly. But then I wake up to somebody pounding on my door and screaming at the top of their lungs. Open the door. Let me in now. My entire apartment reeks like cigarette smoke. I grab my phone from beside my bed, my heart beating 1,000,000 miles per hour. 27 missed phone calls, a bunch of text messages, all from Emily. I scanned through the texts, while she's still at the door, screaming, trying to break down my door. The most recent text from her is a long one, claiming that I'm a piece of shit for not responding to a text earlier, and that she's coming over to beat the shit out of me for not doing so. She had a key to the building still from when she used to live there. I get out of bed, nearly having a panic attack, and try to decide what my next move should be. Should I open the door to calm her down? Should I call the police? Should I just ignore her? I decide to open the door, though, and she begins wailing on me, swinging her arms, trying to hit me. She was smoking a cigarette, and there were 3 cigarette butts on the ground next to her. Smoking indoors was prohibited in my apartment building. She was very obviously on some sort of drug, though. She just kept screaming at me, telling me how awful I am for not responding to her text messages, slurring her speech and losing her balance. I was somehow able to calm her down, and I took her to the roof of the apartment building, which had a pretty nice enclosed picnic table area. We sat beside one another, and she was quiet now, finally. She kept asking me how I could be such an asshole and that I need to explain myself. And the look in her eyes was just pure evil as she spoke to me in this calm demeanor. I said to her, "Emily, I don't ever want to speak to you again after tonight. This whole scenario is absolutely insane. You need help. Let me walk you home." I take her home, and I return to my apartment to attempt sleeping again, at which I don't succeed this time. A couple of days later, I return home from work, and there's an envelope taped to my door. I open it, and it's a handwritten letter from Emily apologizing and saying that I'm a beautiful human who doesn't deserve an evil person like her in their life. There was a candy bar attached to the envelope, one that I'd never heard of that she always told me I needed to try. I never spoke to her again after this. But from what Matt tells me, which by the way, he always knew that she was a problematic person. She's a heavy user of crack now and is working as a food runner in a restaurant nearby. Needless to say, I did not try that candy bar. I worked at a local government agency for a long time. Each summer, we would get a new crop of interns, too. Most of them were fine, but some caused issues, like when we caught 2 of them, actually, making out in the file room. But overall, they were just normal kids from high school or college trying to get some work experience. In 2016, my department received an intern later than usual, right in the middle of the summer. Warner was a bit older than the usual crowd around my age, in fact, maybe late 20s. We initially hit it off pretty well. Although I found him sort of strange, I didn't mind since he was friendly, and we had some common interests. He was the only person in my department who was even close to my age, too. So, that was kind of nice. The interns were all teenagers, and the regular staff averaged around 60 older than my mum. I was pretty psyched to have a peer to chat with. Occasionally, I would eat lunch with Warner or stop to talk in his cubicle and whatnot. His strangeness was mostly an outsized personality, a mix of over-the-top enthusiasm with a bit of social awkwardness. I got zero bad vibes from the guy, if I'm being honest. But it wasn't long before Warner started having major performance problems at work. He would produce little to no work on most days, no-show or arrive late without informing anyone, and generally just acted One day, he showed up for work at 3:15 p.m. when our workday ended at 4:30. The office manager was livid and told him to just go home. His behavior bothered nearly everyone in my office, too, but I didn't supervise him, and we had plenty of slacker interns in the past. While his antics were a bit of a spectacle, it wasn't a big deal to me. Now, if you're wondering why he wasn't let go, 2 words: political favor. I found out from Warner himself that he was hired because his uncle donated to the campaign of our big boss. In other words, he wasn't going anywhere. Near the end of that summer though, I put in my notice that I was leaving my job and relocating to a new state. Once Warner caught wind of this, he would constantly complain that it sucked that I was leaving because we barely had time to become friends. I would always laugh lightly in response and give him a sympathetic yeah, but he would start to monopolize my time at work more and more, and it became disruptive to the people who sat near me. In fact, I found it slightly annoying. But I also was extremely happy to be leaving that job for reasons unrelated to Warner. And I spent my last month there, not caring much about my co-workers and what they thought. So I tolerated him lingering by my desk. One day though, he caught me leaving work and offered me a ride home. I usually took the bus, and occasionally other co-workers would offer me rides home if they were going my way. So this didn't seem odd to me. I accepted and walked to his car with him. And man, it smelled awful and was just full of garbage. He hastily cleared off the passenger seat and apologized, and we got on our way. But once we were on the main road, he started begging me to stop and get dinner with him. I laughed and said that he didn't need to ask me that insistently, and said that we could stop at a diner on the way. We had a nice meal with pleasant conversation, and he was intelligent and had a variety of interests. Our political positions aligned, and we shared disdain for our cranky old co-workers. Quite honestly, I had a good time. I expressed that he didn't need to drive me all the way home now that it was getting late, but he kept insisting, so I just relented in the end. As I directed him toward my house, he started in again with the whining about how our developing friendship was cut short because I was moving. At this point, I was tired of hearing this. The decision to leave my job and move away from home was extremely difficult to make anyway, and I was proud of how bold I was being. I stopped responding and laughing, and his whining faded out. We came up to the turn to get onto my street, and when I pointed it out, he accelerated and drove right past it, laughing. I laughed in a "what the hell are you doing" kind of way, thinking he was just joking around. When I began giving directions about how to turn around and get back, he started begging me to keep hanging out with him because he was lonely. This immediately set me on high alert. It suddenly hit me that I'm in a man's car, someone I don't know that well, who doesn't exercise proper behavior at work, which is the only context I know him. And now he's displaying really weird behavior outside of work as well. My instinct was to not insist I be let out of his car. I felt as if this would escalate the situation into something negative, and in hindsight, it may have been the right thing to do when I think about the type of person he turned out to be. So I told him that we could hang out at the park near my house if he wanted to talk more. He seemed to like that idea, and we parked and walked over. The pleasant conversations resumed, and besides the weird clinginess, he was perfectly fine. To talk to him till he dumped his entire life story on me, including his prior arrest for theft, his heroin addiction, and related struggles with depression. I tried to be sympathetic, but I was very put off by this. It was a lot of highly personal information all at once, and I was still on alert because of his prior behavior, mind you. I tried changing the subject by showing him pics of my dog. I scrolled one pic too far, and the next one was a photo of me wearing makeup and posing cutely way differently than the slob I was at work. He grabbed the phone and went, "Wow, you're very photogenic." I felt awkward and didn't say anything. There was a long silence, and then he launched into a weird tangent about how compatible we are, that we have similar interests, etc., and that he wishes I wasn't moving so that we could try hanging out again, but on a date this time. I didn't say anything, and he broke the silence with, "Sorry, I'm saying all of this stuff. I'm actually high right now. That's why I know where Riverside, a bad neighborhood that had previously come up in conversation. I went there yesterday to buy it, otherwise I wouldn't have said it, and I'm really sorry." Internally, I freaked out at this. He had definitely put his drug addiction in the past tense, and I assumed it was something he was recovering from, not currently using. I also realized that I had been in a car that he was operating while he was under the influence. I don't know anything about heroin, so I was pretty clueless, but I felt very, very stupid at this point. He immediately started whining and begging me not to judge him or hate him, and just kept saying over and over again how nice I am, how understanding I am, that I'm pretty, and smart, all of these weird compliments interspersed with talking down about himself. I didn't know what to do, so I just smiled reassuringly and told him not to worry. But that's when I said I was tired and needed to go home, and that's when he started crying. He had this really weird, wheezy sob, too, but no tears were coming out. I sat there silently while he did this, trying to come up with some sort of graceful escape plan. But my patience was wearing thin at this point, and my anxiety was through the roof. It's a weird feeling to be annoyed and panicky at the same time. So, I stood up and apologized, said the park was close to my house, so I'll walk, and started to leave when I remembered that I left all of my stuff in his car. Trying a new approach, I casually mentioned that I forgot my stuff in his car and joked that if he wanted my dirty lunch containers, he could keep them. He ceased his bizarre crying and stood up, ran over to his car to unlock it. I grabbed my stuff out of the back seat. His demeanor changed drastically as he calmly apologized for making things weird, and asked if he could drop me off at home so I didn't have to walk alone at night. I said yes in the end, but made him drop me off a block over from my little side street so he wouldn't see which house was mine. Now, I could end it there, but what bothered me the most about this guy happened after this encounter, and I'll try to make this part short. A week or two after that weird evening, and the end of August by this point, I had my last day at the job and moved 1,000 miles across the country. Warner would sometimes text me with long ramblings, detailing his feelings about himself and about our missed opportunity, and I didn't respond to these messages. But now that I wasn't near him, I didn't feel the need to placate him. The texts stopped after a few weeks, and quite honestly, I just forgot about it. Fast forward to February, and I get a text from a former co-worker. Her message said, "Sorry you had to hear about it this way," and included a link to a local news article titled, "Man Dies from Wounds in Riverside, Stabbing on Wednesday." Because of the way she worded it, I thought Warner was the victim, but when I read the article, it included his mugshot and the charges. Apparently, he was the attacker, and he actually murdered someone. I felt so shocked and disgusted that I couldn't believe I knew someone who killed another human. Later on, I called an old co-worker for some details. Apparently, shortly after I left the job, he was fired for trashing the men's bathroom, just threw around anything he could lift, poured all the soap out, and smeared it all over the place. He then apparently lost his apartment. Presumably, some of the articles about the stabbing describe Warner as a homeless man. I have to assume that's how he ended up in the aforementioned Riverside. There are a lot of homeless drug addicts who squat in abandoned houses there at the time. I wondered if the man he stabbed had refused to give him something he wanted, and that is how he reacted to a hard no. I don't think I made all the wisest decisions during my interactions with Warner. But man, I'm glad I was able to avoid setting him off like that, since he was clearly not stable at all. Hands down, that was the worst intern I ever encountered. So, this was about 3 years ago, on a dark stretch of road near a main intersection in a major Bay Area city. I worked at a big-name healthy grocery store from 2014 to 2017. I was lucky to meet and work with amazing co-workers, some of whom have become my best and closest friends. In fact, one of my best friends at the time, and to this day Kev, is one of the nicest, most caring people I've ever met. He's incredibly generous, genuine, and warm and welcoming to just about everyone, sometimes to a fault. In fact, at the time of this story, I'm a woman in my early 20s, and Kev is a guy in his late 20s. Kev and I had a weekly ritual of driving around the city after work and just talking, sometimes about our problems, sometimes about what was going well, but it was therapeutic and always something to look forward to. This particular night, we invited our buddy Ben to join us. His department always got out 30 to 45 minutes after the rest of the store. So Kev and I decided we should do a short drive around the area to pass the time until Ben was off. Kev was driving that night to Dot. We did our drive and are headed back to the store to pick up Ben. In order to get back to the store, we need to make a U-turn at a four-way intersection. To get to the intersection, we have to go down a dark but short stretch of road. There are no streetlights for some reason. I don't know why. The intersection is well lit though, and is always busy, with a shopping center and plazas on each side. From the dark section of the road, it's exactly 302 feet according to Google Maps to the main well-lit and ever-busy intersection. As we're driving down the dark section, Kev suddenly interrupts what I was saying and says, "Oh, did you see that person waving?" He slows down the car as I look back. "No, what are you talking about?" I say. He says, "You didn't see them. There was someone in a black hoodie waving us down." I'm looking back, and I have poor eyesight. It's dark, so no, I don't see anyone. There's no one there. As I'm saying this though, Kev is pulling into the empty parking lot parallel to the dark stretch of road. He reaches to the back seat, moving jackets and other stuff off the seat, obviously making room for this person. I said to Kev, "No, no one is getting in this car. Do you understand?" But he then says, "If they need help." But I interrupt and say, "No, there's no one there. And even if there was, they could walk up to the intersection, so no." He eventually agrees but insists that we continue to circle around and check. I reluctantly agree but realize I have no choice anyway. So we circle back, and sure enough, there is a girl my age, in her early 20s, just standing alone wearing all black. She has a hoodie on. She looks disheveled and is sort of crying. Maybe Kev rolls down the passenger window, my window about halfway, to which I roll it back up another quarter of the way and asks her if she's okay. She seems off to me, and I immediately have these awful vibes from her. She says, with her hands over her face, "4 guys stole my purse. It had my wallet, and I literally lost everything, and I don't have a phone." The weirdest thing about this is that she wasn't actually crying. She was stretching her words out and kind of whining, but she wasn't crying. I said, "Okay, well, we'll call the police for you. Why don't you walk up to the well-lit plaza at the main intersection, and we'll wait with you for the police?" She adamantly says, "No, it won't help. I already called the police an hour ago." And this is when I started to freak out. She just said she didn't have a phone and that she's standing in the dark for an hour. I said to her, "I thought you don't have a phone," and she said, "I do, but it's just dead." All of this was happening rapid fire, and before I can really mentally get into what is going on, Kev tells her to get into the car so that we can help her. I say, "Walk up to the plaza to the intersection and we'll help you." But Kev unlocks the door and says, "No, don't worry, we'll drive you there." The girl has her hands in the front pocket of her hoodie and gets into the car. And at this point, I am pissed, absolutely fuming. In fact, the girl is acting super weird. And I remember at this point that I have my box cutter on me. I reach down into my backpack and rummage through my crap to find it. Kev is talking to her, but everything she says is contradictory. She says she isn't from this area, has no idea where she is, yet she tells us she grew up and lives about 6 blocks away. As we're driving, she says she wants to go to a particular bar that she could actually use a drink. I said to her, I thought you don't have your wallet or ID. I keep looking for my box cutter, and I'm looking back at her. She has a waxy complexion and looks into my eyes as if she's looking through me, and it gives me the creeps. Kev is incredibly kind to her idiot hand, keeps saying positive things, trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. While this is happening, I find my box cutter, open it all the way, and hold it in my lap. I turn back and keep my eyes on her. She tells us that she actually has a boyfriend nearby eventually and asks us to take her there. She and Kev continue to talk, and she says she was kicked out of her parents' house. Her hands still remain in her pocket, and mine remain holding the box cutter all this time. Because of this whole ordeal, we've totally forgotten about Ben at this point. While still watching her, I pull my phone out and call him. I'm explaining to Ben what's happening, and in a matter of seconds, she went from asking us for money and alcohol and just saying weird things to just wanting to get out of the car. We didn't stop at her boyfriend's house, but a few streets away, apparently. In a random neighborhood, we drop her off, and there's silence for a few seconds in the car. Then Kev says, "Oh, she could have robbed us or killed us." Yeah, thanks, you idiot. Anyway, I'm 100% certain that at the very least, she was planning to rob us. Looking back on this, there's so much that I would have done differently, like calling the cops right away. We were lucky that nothing happened. But I'm positive that there was evil in that car that night. For a bit of context, I grew up in the middle of farmland in a large 1800s Victorian home. Given its history, there have always been several shacks and barns that once belonged to the builder of this house. There's a highway that sees about maybe 3 cars on it during the night, and directly across from said highway, about 200 feet inward of a cornfield, is a shack that I've always found creepy as kids. Myself and friends would dare each other to go inside and look, which always ended up with us going as a team. Nothing scary was ever found, but it was always a bit of fun maybe. A few broken glasses, metal piles of miscellaneous items. There was no electricity or any sort of utility that made it homely, though. The years go by and the existence of the shack becomes just a part of my daily life. However, one particular night, as I was watching TV, I noticed a light going off and on outside my window. After initially getting a little bit startled, I just dismissed it as passing cars, simply more frequent than they typically are. An hour passes, and it's nearing midnight and the light stays on. But this time, I know for sure that it's coming. From outside, my family was asleep, but being my pansy 16-year-old self, I needed confirmation. But too bad for Mino wants to go out and check it out. So, I end up going alone. I grabbed my pocket knife and flashlight. It was the best I could think of with my shaken thoughts, and I take off into the night. As I near the highway, the lights turn off, almost making me choke on air. But I had to figure out what the hell was going on in there. I eventually make it to the entrance of the shack, which has no door, and slowly begin to enter, my flashlight scanning the room for any sign of life. And what happened next, I'll never forget. 5 feet away from me, There's an old tattered recliner facing away that my father had tossed in there for future disposal. I shined my light on it because I knew I'd seen it rock ever so slightly. As I did that, a man stands up from the recliner, saying absolutely nothing. All I could tell was that he was middle-aged and wearing a jacket of sorts. Before I could even process what was happening, I was already sprinting across the road and praying that he wasn't behind me. It felt like years before I made it back to my door, but as I'm about to make it into safety, I decide to look back, and he was standing on the road, completely still. No words whatsoever. It's been 7 years since then, and the shack still stands. The recliner remains in place, and my dad never believed me. I wish someone could share the dread that I had when I realized that the recliner was facing a window which was directed straight at my house. So, this happened while I was still living in St. Louis, and I've since moved to Chicago. But 2016 was a wild year for me, full of coming out of my shell and self-discovery. I found myself becoming more comfortable with using applications such as Grindr and Scruff to meet men online because I had social anxiety and had trouble meeting them elsewhere. One night, I got a message from a seemingly average dude. He was very nice, super funny, able to hold a conversation, and not that bad looking. So I was intrigued and kept the conversation going. There were virtually no red flags about him, and I ended up exchanging numbers with him. We get to texting. And after a week or so of solid conversation, we decide to meet up at a local cafe. I put on my best damn shirt, clean underwear, and hit the road, and I'm excited. I was busy during the day, so we planned to meet at a local cafe around 8 p.m. He doesn't live in the city like I do, so he was unfamiliar with the area. But when we met, I was immediately enamored with this guy, too. He was cute, he made me laugh, and surprise, he was who his photographs actually said he was. Nothing was strange about this guy. He was just a cutie pie, and I was digging him. And by the feel of things, he was digging me, too. What a twist, right? Anyway, at one point during the night, we were sharing memes with each other over the table. I show him one of the funniest that I have in my photos, and he nonchalantly grabs my phone from me to take a closer look. He started swiping on my phone for a minute, and at this point, I didn't think anything of it because I just assumed he was looking at the other memes I have saved. But no big deal. He gave me back my phone and then proceeded to show me some memes. On his phone this time. A man who has a folder of saved memes on his phone is a true godsend, let me tell you. Anyway, the night goes on and the cafe is closing, so we decide to leave. As we're walking out together, he asks if I want to still hang out. I didn't feel comfortable letting him know where I live just yet. So we just drove around the city, listening to music and talking and whatnot. Just stuff like that. It was again. Just pretty normal, and we were laughing and joking around. But at one point in the night, he turns to me at a red light and asks, "Do your roommates know you're on a date right now?" I laughed at this and just said, "No. Why, are you going to kill me? I've honestly just read way too many things online," and that was my immediate reaction. He lightly just said, "I would use them as an emergency backup if I were you." "You're probably right," I shot back, and we just continued with the night. It was nearing midnight, and I had a lot of laundry to do the next day. So, I mentioned that we should probably head home soon. He offered to drop me off at my house, but I didn't want him to know where I live just yet, like I said. So, I asked if he could just drop me off at the train instead, and he politely agreed. When I got home that night, I was totally thrilled with how things turned out. He was a total sweetheart, and I was really into him. So, I opened up our conversation to shoot him a text message when I noticed at the bottom of our conversation was a notification that said, "You started sharing your location today at this time." I thought it was a little odd since I never used that feature, but I thought maybe I did it by accident or something and just turned it off. I sent him a follow-up text message saying that I had a really great time and would love to meet up with him again, but he didn't respond to this. I just assumed he was busy and started browsing Reddit like the senseless I am. I woke up the next morning and prepared to do my chores, washing my bed sheets, buying groceries, going to therapy. The grocery store was my last stop, and as I was ringing up all of my necessities, guess who was also in the self-checkout? It was the guy. Wow, imagine that. He immediately comes over and strikes up a conversation with me. And I thought it was odd, as he previously mentioned that he doesn't live in the city and isn't very familiar with it, but the conversation was harmless. So, I just kind of let it slide. A few weeks go by, and unfortunately, the conversations begin to dwindle, and we start talking less and less. Quite honestly, I'm used to this happening, I guess. So, I just let it happen without pushing for answers. And eventually, we just stopped talking altogether. One night, I'm home alone, just sitting down watching cartoons, when there's a knock at the door. It was late, so I didn't feel comfortable answering. So I just sat there for a moment, hoping they'd go away. And they knocked again, more urgently this time. I peeked through the peephole, and I made out two figures, and my heart immediately dropped as I recognized one of them in a hoodie or hat combo. He had an extremely defined jaw, so I was able to immediately recognize him. Well, I literally freaked the hell out and called one of my roommates to come home and that it was urgent. But when Andrew came home, he told me that he didn't see anybody near the apartment complex. So I calmed down a bit and explained the situation. It was also during this calming down period that I realized he found out where I lived by my location, sharing that he turned on while we were at the cafe. I didn't immediately turn it off when I got home, so he had plenty of time to figure out my coordinates, especially if he was watching the map immediately after he dropped me off at the train station. He never did show up again after this particular occurrence, and I never heard from him again either. I also noticed that our conversations disappeared from Grindr when I last checked, so I assume he must have blocked me. I still have no idea what he was planning to do, but I assume he was just going to rob me. But it's completely possible that it could have been something worse, so this all happened when I was in 8th grade. I lived down the street from my friends Dylan and Eamon, and we used to hang out every single day after school. After a while, we got into Ouija boards and such. We didn't have a real one, but we printed one offline and made a makeshift one using a hoop earring. We would play with it daily for about 2 months or longer, even in Dylan's basement. In the laundry room, to clarify, Dylan's basement and laundry room had no windows. Dylan was a musical kid, and he had a xylophone in his basement down there to play. I remember he actually taught me how to play Here Comes the Sun on it too. So, this particular day, we went into the basement, and I played that tune on the xylophone because I thought I was hot doing so. I then laid the mallets down flat across the xylophone, and we proceeded into the laundry room to play with the Ouija board, backtracking a little bit, though we had played with it for a couple of months regularly at this point. We had also become acquainted with some sort of spirit by this point as well. He hated talking about how he died. In fact, just wouldn't do. A Tand was apparently enamored with me. But the earring moved so quickly and on its own to a lot. So, I was already pretty convinced. But of course, I wanted more. So, this one. Datha, last time the guys would play with it, I had asked the spirit for a sign. Yes, I know that's dangerous and kind of against the rules, but the spirit agrees, and I asked what we needed to pay attention to, and it told me the door. Hanging on the doorknob was a tie, but we waited for about 5 minutes, and then the tie fluttered back and forth for a second. The guys were stunned because there was no passage of air anywhere within the basement, let alone the laundry room. I, however, thought it was pretty much nothing and certainly not enough to convince me. So, I ended up asking for another sign. Again, I'm not stupid. When I asked though, the spirit obliged. I again asked what I needed to pay attention to, and he told me to listen. We sat there for about another 5 to 10 minutes, with pretty much nothing happening. And then, all of a sudden, we hear one loud ring of a singular xylophone key play out. We walk out of the laundry room, and we find both the xylophone mallets are wedged in between the xylophone keys, just standing straight up. Nothing happened after this, since the guys wouldn't play anymore. And honestly, I never got it to work in my house. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story. So, I don't know how to begin this, but I decided to share this. Always carry a firearm for protection though. A few weeks ago, we decided to load up on some camping gear and start a new trail. We mark the trails that we make with spray paint on trees. We were pretty far in the woods, and having hiked almost an hour now when the atmosphere just seemed to change. I don't know who noticed it at first, but my husband, who was leading the three of us, turned around and gave me a concerned look. The birds had stopped chirping at this point, and the insects had gone quiet. There were just absolutely no sounds around us at all. And when in the woods, complete quietness is rarely a good thing. We continued onward, though hyper-aware of our surroundings, while our kid continued merely talking. We came to the stream that marks the midway point of our property, and we stopped for a few minutes. My husband and I just kind of stared at each other down. We both felt like something was off, but didn't want to scare our daughter. Eventually, I finally broke the silence and said, "I suddenly don't feel good, and we should just go home." My husband nodded in agreement while our daughter voiced her protest, "But too bad, kiddo." We turned around and started back. After going a few hundred yards still in the silent wilderness, mind you, I looked to my right and saw a person crouched down in a ghillie suit about 150 feet off the trail. I'm positive they saw that I noticed them too, but they never moved. I cleared my throat to get my husband's attention, and when he looked back, I put my hand on the gun in my holster on my hip, which caused him to readjust his rifle in preparation for anything. I sped up my family, and we hurried back home, and I told my husband as soon as we were inside. We decided to call the police and report the trespasser. Filed a report, and were told to call again if we saw anyone. A few days later, my husband and I went out alone and set up a bunch of deer cams. We didn't go back out into the woods for maybe a week. Then he and I ventured out to retrieve the cam footage. Out of the 9 cams we placed, we caught a person in a ghillie suit in 2 images. We handed copies over to the cops to go with our report, and we haven't gone back out since, except to check the deer cams. We haven't gotten any other trespassers pretty much ever, and it freaks me out even more to think of the few times while camping that we actually heard walking near our tent in the middle of the night. We always assumed it was just curious animals, but now I'm not so sure anymore. So before I tell this, I think I need to give some quick background info that seems relatively important to the story. It's 2003, and I'm 6 years old. At the time, I lived in a small condo, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, and a connected living room and kitchen with an island in between, and a spiral staircase with random miscellaneous things stored under it. I was living with my dad, with a mother who was out of the picture. It was Saturday, and I remember specifically watching Codename, Kids Next Door on TV in the bedroom after waking up. My dad worked a lot of the time, but he was such a nice guy that he left the TV on Cartoon Network for me, which he knew was my favorite channel. During a commercial break, I got up to take a piss, and even though I knew I was home alone, I closed the door out of instinct. And boy, am I glad about that. The next thing I comprehended was the sound of my incredibly noisy spiral stairs. They can be heard literally across the condo because of how small it is, and they just began to rapidly make noise that got quieter over the course of about 2 seconds, telling me that whatever made the noise was going downstairs and fast. As a 6-year-old, this was extremely concerning because, as I said, my dad always turned the TV on before he left for work, and I knew he was long gone at this point. So, what did I do? Well, as any paranoid 6-year-old would do when they think they've imagined it, I walked out of the bathroom and looked over the 3-foot-long railing across from the bathroom door, and next to where you would walk down the stairs. Kind of confusing, I know, but just try to visualize it, I guess, if you want. And what did I see? None other than an afraid-looking man looking into my living room, but staying hidden under the stairs. After being terrified in the bathroom, I made a distinct effort to be quiet, like a spy or something. So, there was no way he knew I was looking at him, but more than likely he practically guaranteed, in fact, knew that I was in the house somewhere. Okay, so there is a man in the house, and I can yell at him to leave and maybe be murdered, raped, or beaten, or something. By the way, there was no exit upstairs, only a balcony with a screen door that was jammed for years. And even if I somehow got it unstuck, it's like a 15-foot drop that would be no good anyway. So, the only exit in the house is the front door. It's a fire hazard, I know. Or there was option B, hide. I opted for option B, obviously. I waited for what felt like hours, but in reality was probably only about 20 minutes until I heard shuffling downstairs for about a minute. Then the sound I was praying for, the front door opening. I was still extremely skeptical, even thinking it was a trap to lure me downstairs. So I stayed put upstairs, all die in view of the TV, by the way, until my dad came home, who I didn't tell about the whole incident out of fear that I shouldn't have had, thinking he would be mad that I didn't approach him or something. Nothing valuable was missing from the house, but you're sure as hell that I checked under those stairs every morning when I walked down them for the next 3.5 years of living in that condo. So, why was he there? I have no idea. How was he there? I have a pretty reasonable theory that, simply put, my dad forgot to lock the door behind him after he left, and this man was trying doors for some reason. He came in and hid upstairs somewhere to do something, but got cold feet because I was a little kid. But other than that, I have no idea. All I can say is, man, am I glad I had that bathroom door shut, because if he had seen me directly, who knows what could have happened. Back in 2013, I was living with my ex at the time, who lived near a nice country village. As I was in between jobs at the time, I picked up a job at a local garden center. It was casual retail work, fairly decent pay, and easygoing enough that I could take a coffee break frequently and wear basically whatever I liked as long as I wore my work polo shirt. It was walking distance from my ex's house and full of people of all ages who were the most lovely people I've ever met. Most of the regular customers who came to the garden center were usually sweet old people who would visit the cafe because we had free tea and discounted lunches for the OAPs if they had a store card. So, you often got to know all of them, and some of them we even gave nicknames. Most of them were pretty sweet, like Pink Hair Lady. She was a badass 80-year-old grandma who wore a tasseled leather jacket and bright pink hair. Then there was campervan couple who used to drive a really cool campervan with bright orange flowers painted on it. You get the idea. But with creepy artist man, though, he gave most of the young girls their weird vibes. He wore a straw hat, was in his late 40s, I'd say, had round gold-rimmed glasses, and would wear strange graphic shirts with naked women on them or professional patrol sort of slogans on the back and stuff. He always wore ripped jeans where his knees were always hanging out of them, which were always dirty with paint or mud or something. He had this weird half smile that would never leave. His face in kind of a leer that made people feel uncomfortable. He would take off his glasses and clean them constantly, which kind of made you feel like he was trying to get a better look at the girls who worked there, or something, especially the younger ones, 16+ school leavers usually. Anyway, it was a roasting hot summer's day, and I had gratefully accepted the job of watering the hanging baskets outside, where I could avoid the humid, sweaty heat of the greenhouses. I was wearing black shorts and my red polo and my tool belt to prune and deadhead the plants as I went. With the hose in my hand and sunnies on my face, I was busy but enjoying the solitary job at the quietest part of the garden center. Then I heard, well, hello there, out of practically nowhere. He slipped out behind some wooden trellises and looked me up and down, smiling with these weird, too small teeth. His eyes lingered on me for what felt like an uncomfortable few seconds. I turned off my hose and asked him if he needed anything. He shook his head and kind of shrugged, still smirking at my legs, too. I said to him, "Okay, sir. Have a nice day. Let me know if you need anything." And I turned to continue. He says, "I've never seen you here before. You're a new one, right?" I say, "Huh? Me? Well, I've been here for 8 months now." He says, "I must have missed the memo that a beauty like you started here. You have a nice tan. You look young." I say, thanks. I'm 23. Anyways, I have to go back to work." And he says, "Nice to meet you," and quotes my name. I suddenly remember my name badge, and I get slightly irritated that he now knew my full name. I make a beeline for the smoking area where the tool shed was, with an excuse to grab some smaller gardening gloves. By the time I returned to the floor, he had left. Thankfully, as the weeks went by, he would come into the store regularly, usually mid-afternoon, I'd say. But coincidentally, or so I thought, around the time I started my shift. Most of the time, I was the only cashier, so I would have to serve him. He would buy the smallest pointless things, like florist wire or a tiny bag of birdseed, and it seemed like he would purposely make a purchase with the intention of interacting with me. He would make comments about my appearance statements, mostly like, "You have your hair different today. Yesterday you had it down. You have new glasses," or "That's a different lip color to yesterday." He would always announce my name loudly and deliberately during every interaction, and I felt really uncomfortable. But I was 23 and kind of just politely shrugged it off at the time. Around Christmas time, I was decorating the artificial trees, and he cornered me in the forest of them at the back of the store. He jumped out from behind one, and he actually made me jump, to which I was kind of pissed about because I dropped a glass ornament and it smashed. He bent down also and tried to help, grabbing my wrist and telling me not to touch the glass. His grip was actually scarily tight and forceful, and his hands were clammy and gross. 2. I slipped my hand out of his grip and asked if I could help him with anything. And that's when it got weird. He pulled out a leaflet from his back pocket and told me he was an artist and had a Christmas art show happening in the local church hall, and he wanted me to go with him. He told me he was a painter and thought I would like his work. I had never indicated I was interested in art to him or anyone else for that matter, which is why I thought it was strange. I asked him if he wanted to pin the leaflet to the local event board, and he reached out and touched my arm and said, "No, the invitation is specifically for you." He pointed his finger and jabbed it to my breast and then said, "You." So I'm standing there in a dark corner, obscured from view by artificial Christmas trees, just kind of cornered by this guy who was touching me at this point. I kind of just cringed away and said I was busy with my boyfriend that day. Saran kind of just scampered off at that point. I remember feeling really strange after that, though the fact that he grabbed my wrist and jabbed his finger into my chest that way. I told a few of my colleagues about it, and they told me they would warn me next time he was in the store, so I could maybe hang out in the storeroom until he was gone. Well, that memo must have been missed by a few of the temp Christmas staff, because one day I get told by one, "Your friend is asking for you at the tills." It wasn't totally unusual for my friends to stop by, as it was a fairly popular gift store. So, thinking it was maybe my ex's mum or something, I head to the till, and there he is, and he's holding a piece of paper. I cringe, but he had seen me. Now so, I walk over and ask what he needed from me. He passed the paper over and asked me to open it. Folded up was a drawing of me with exaggerated breasts and cartoon-like eyes watering with hanging baskets in a sexual kind of position. I kind of stood there and said thank you out of just a knee-jerk response. But I couldn't keep it, as I thought it was inappropriate to take gifts from customers and all. I handed it back to him, and he kind of looked at me with this angry stare. He turned around and walked out just without another word. By this point, I had had enough, to be honest, and I knocked on my manager's door and told him about the whole scenario that had just happened and all the previous interactions I'd had with him over the past year. He watched the CCTV and agreed that it was really strange that he gave me this gross picture and told me he could talk to him if he came back. He praised me for my reaction to his advances and said I was doing the right thing, and he would try to see him off next time if there was a next time. The next day was Sunday, and I wasn't due to work. My boss calls me and tells me he just received a call from HQ stating that an anonymous caller had called in to report a staff member inappropriately coming onto a customer. The staff member they described and named was me. The caller had said that I had been inappropriate towards him at work, offered to have sex with him, had led him on, and obviously was promiscuous, and that I had been pursuing him for over a year now. The jerk even described a fictitious relationship. We had had and ranted loudly about how I'd been cheating on my boyfriend before hanging up. HQ luckily didn't believe a word, as my manager had already mentioned the guy to one of the higher-ups, but they thought it was wise to let me know about this crazy guy and suggest that I report it to the police at this point. The next day, I did just that. The officer I spoke to said he actually matched the description of a man who was just a local pest, somebody who would often harass young girls in the local area. And he was also known to stalk girls in his car and had even attempted to abduct a young girl 4 years ago. Holy shit, right. The police officers assured me that they would file the report and talk to him officially, and that he was not allowed in the garden center or anywhere near me again. And if he did, I was to call the police, and he would actually be arrested. Unfortunately though, it never stopped him sending a ranting letter to my workplace addressed to me saying that he was going to end himself if I didn't take him back and receive his gift that he drew of me. Fortunately, the police saw this as unsolicited contact, and he was thankfully arrested. I don't know where he is and whatever happened to him, but the fact that he actually tried to abduct a young girl 4 years ago is creepy to say the least. My mother and father had been separated since I was about 1 or 2 years old, I'd say, and I visited my father occasionally during the summers while I lived with my mother. But for some reason, my mum believed it was a great idea to send me to my father's this summer. And this, despite at the time, he didn't even have an official place to stay because he had gotten kicked out of his home a few weeks after I'd gotten there. So, he resorted to staying with a friend he had met at a past homeless shelter, Pete. Now Pete's home, on the surface, looked decent. And even though he seemed odd, nothing rang any real bells, and he seemed pretty much okay. The first night I knew something was wrong, though, is when I fell asleep in his bed. But that night, I woke up with bedbug bites just all over me. I mean, they were literally everywhere. When I first complained to my dad about the bites, too, Pete was a bit upset and said, "My bed don't got any bedbugs. You must have brought them in." And he was just in absolute denial at that point. Another side note, my dad left for work, leaving me alone with Pete for 8 to 12 hours a day sometimes. After a few days of being there, I started to get more restless, too, because Pete would sometimes make suggestive comments toward me that had sexual implications, or would just refuse to let me eat anything until my dad came home. For many of those wondering why I didn't tell my dad, well, because I assumed that if we didn't stay here, he would end up living on the streets, and I'd rather deal with this than live in a cardboard box, right? However, one day I was a bit more talkative than usual. Mind you, at this time I hadn't slept for around 21 hours and hadn't eaten for half that time. I was exhausted, but the bedbug bites constantly made me itchy and I couldn't sleep, and I just had to talk. I don't remember completely how it even got to this point, but all I can remember is that I was in the bathroom, so, at some stage, I think I possibly told Pete that I was just fed up with him and would tell my dad. As I closed the door behind me, he suddenly came charging in like a bull. I tried locking the door, but he wouldn't let me close it. A 12-year-old versus a grown man didn't stand a chance strength-wise. Now, my mum constantly trained and drilled into my head that adults can be dangerous, that you should never get into someone's car. And in her own words, if they got you in the car, play along and then grab the steering wheel and try to crash the car. It's better to die than have them get you to the second location. No matter what, even if you have to risk your life, never let them get power or take you into that second location. I remember going into instinct mode, and I grabbed the razor he left on his sink. Pete was screaming things like, "I'll kill you," and other stuff like that mixed in with swear words. Remember, I stupidly dropped my phone near the toilet, but opened the door and slipped beneath Pete's arms. I sprinted for the door, and he caught me and slammed me into the wall. I remember slicing his arm with the razor when he tried to strangle me, getting up and just running outside his house. He wasn't able to catch me at this point, and then I made another stupid mistake. Some old guy beneath our floor kind of knew my dad and offered me to stay at his house and wait for him to get home. Guys, I know this was dumb to accept, but I was tired and hungry and just wasn't thinking straight. When he made me a sandwich, and gave me a blanket to sleep on his couch. I was thinking, what if he poisoned this food or was going to try to rape me when I fell asleep or something? Imagine a 12-year-old thinking about all of this already. What a world we live in, right? Next thing I knew, I fell asleep with the razor clutched in my hands. Yeah, I fell asleep in this man's house who I didn't even know. I couldn't even call my dad because my phone had fallen somewhere in Pete's house during all the scuffle and everything. But eventually, my dad got home and immediately threatened. Pete grabbed our things, and we went to a motel until I was able to go back to my mother's place. Needless to say, that was the worst summer of my entire life. This is a story that I tell pretty frequently, actually, to friends. But to this day, I still haven't told either of my parents. I'm 23 now, and this must have happened when I was 11 or 12, I'd say, because I was still in middle school at this time. Growing up, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, mostly because both of my parents worked long shifts and long hours. It wasn't uncommon that I would even spend the night at theirs during the school week, since my middle school was just a few